Peace and blessings, and welcome to Catholic Crossroads, a Black Catholic's journey, where we discuss topics from a Black Catholic's perspective pertaining to spiritual and social issues that is happening locally, globally, and nationally. My name is Gardis Watts,
And my name is Tina Carter.
and we're part of the Chicago Black Catholics Alliance, an organization that works to collaborate with other Black Catholics in Chicago and the Chicagoland area. This month, we recognize the newly elected Pope Leo XIV, also formerly known as Cardinal Robert Prevost, a person who grew up in the Chicagoland area. We'll try to offer insight on the new pontiff and why his election to the seat of Peter is unique. Also, in celebration of Father's Day, we will offer perspectives of spiritual fatherhood and why it's important. Juneteenth is coming up, and we will explain why it's important as well. And lastly, one of the more popular movies right now, Sinners. We will offer an intriguing perspective of what we thought about this movie.
And also, as we look at this season of transitions, we also have to give a special shout out to our very own Gardis Watts, who just received his Master's in Divinity from Catholic Theological Union, which, by the way, is also the same seminary that Pope Leo XIV also graduated from with a Master's in Divinity.
And shout out to Father Betanora, who also graduated with me on Thursday with his MDiv, but he was also ordained into the priesthood Saturday, and he did his first Mass today, his Mass of Thanksgiving. So shout out to Father Betanora as well. So Pope Leo, the new Pope.
Yes.
Formerly, like I said, Cardinal Robert Prevost from the Chicagoland area, and also, like we said, a graduate of Catholic Theological Union. The first Pope to be an American.
Yes.
So this is the unique perspective of why Pope Leo, it's very intriguing, because I remember when I was watching the whole thing, I was like, no, they're not going to do American Pope. American Pope's that's not going to happen. But what I found out later from certain people who were in the College of Cardinals, out of all of the candidates who, the American candidates who were eligible to be Pope,
Yes.
Cardinal Prevost was often called the least Americans of the American.
And that actually makes sense given that he spent most of his mission in Peru. Father Bob, as some people like to call him, is an Augustinian. And he spent the better part of 20 years in Peru serving the people there. And actually, when it became time for him to become a bishop and a cardinal, one of the laws that Peru has is that their cardinal has to come from Peru. So he became a citizen of Peru, which is really fascinating. So he brings this unique perspective of being the second pope from the Americas and the first pope from the U.S. And I would also like to say that in addition to being a graduate of CTU, which I am as well, we also share the same birthday, September 14th. So there's just a lot of wonderful things that we can, that we're looking forward to in his papacy. The other thing, too, that I've been reading about is actually how Pope Francis was very strategic in placing Cardinal Prevost, now Pope Leo XIV, in a position to where he would ultimately become Pope. And I think that this was Pope Francis's way of sort of making sure that the papacy that he began, that we would continue on the trajectory that he started.
Yeah, and so with that particular perspective, we see the College of Cardinals expand across the world in regards to there are more international cardinals in that particular conclave that were from several places around the world because a lot of times in this history most of the cardinals are from Italy,
Yeah,
or from Europe.
right.
But now you have a set of cardinals from Asia, a set of cardinals from Africa, a set of cardinals from South America, all over the world. So just like you said, Pope Francis made it intentional, it was an intentional assignments to
Right.
these particular because I think he with Cardinal Prevost, he had assigned him what in 2024, right?
2023.
2023, yes. So he's also new as well. And what's also interesting and unique is the speed of how he got elected, because it was only 2 days.
Right.
And I think it was 3 votes or 3 rounds of voting.
4.
Okay, 4 rounds of voting, which is not really unusual, but kind of unusual when you think about the whole process of the conclave, because you need 3/4 of the conclave's vote.
Right.
So it's not like a democratic process. You have to get 3/4, and then when you look at the process of the conclave, there is there was no nominations or anything. All those people in the conclave are eligible to be voted on as pope. So was 100 and something
122, I believe.
122 candidates, and one of them has to get 3/4 of the vote. Right. So to do that in 4 rounds was actually probably, like you said, Pope Francis's way of trying to get him in there and kind of convince many of the cardinals that this probably should be the successor, which to me, I think probably before he passed away, that was the guy he was probably, campaigning for.
Yeah, so in a recent article that I actually read, and I'll have to send you the quotations on that. But when Pope Francis actually met Father Bob, they actually met in South America. They actually at the time Pope Francis was a cardinal, and Father Bob was there in Peru, and that's where they first met. So they've been kind of watching each other, I would say, a little bit for a while, and as Pope Francis sort of moved up, he's been kind of keeping his eye on Father Bob. I like that, Father Bob. But what made it most intentional, if you will, is when now Cardinal Prevost was made the head over of who selects the bishops in Rome. And that was done just 2 years ago. So he knew who the bishops were and who everyone was around the world, and they knew who he was. And for anyone who has spoken to him, what I've been hearing is that he's very level-headed, very soft-spoken, but he's very direct. And for those of us in America, to have an American Pope speaking in the American, in our case, Midwestern Chicago vernacular, it does actually bring us in a little bit more so than say, um, of someone from Italy or someone from Europe, or even with Pope Francis, as much as he was beloved, um, to have someone to speak U.S. English, and without the need of a translator.
Yeah.
I think is going to do a lot for the Catholic Church in the United States.
Now, also about Pope Leo is his lineage.
Yes, we do have to discuss his lineage.
So there were several conversations about, is it possible that the church can vote on a black pope? And they were referring to some of the African cardinals that were
Right.
eligible for for the pontiff seat, and they elect Pope Leo. But
Right.
what was found out was he has lineage from New Orleans, from his grandparents or great grandparents who were
On his
who were
mom's side,
who
yes.
were listed as colored,
Right.
and then from his dad's side, he has some Haitian descent from that as well. So he seems to have some sort of African descent background.
That is true. Although, what I will say about his lineage and his heritage is that it's quintessential American in a very real sense. I mean, some call America the melting pot, and his lineage, his heritage reflects that, from French, Spanish, Haitian, Black Creole. I mean, so to me, he is quintessentially the American Pope with all of that diversity that represents America. And I would also argue that through that diversity that's within himself, it's a representation of the world, which to me gives him this very unique perspective. Not only his experience in Peru, but his experience of serving at the highest levels in the Augustinian order. And with that unique perspective, I think that he is the perfect pope for our times, especially as a counterbalance to the power forces that are currently in the upper echelons in the U.S. government. So in that regard, he is, and some people have said this, he is that perfect counterweight to what we're currently seeing in the current presidential administration, which I think it would be most helpful not only for Americans who are kind of, covering their head and trying to make sure you're like, it's a good way for him to kind of counterbalance that.
Yeah, and so I struggle with that whole Americanism idea, because even with the experience, and I agree with you. America is a place where there are many ethnicities. It's supposed to be the land of the free and home of the brave, yada, 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 et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But in some of our cases, especially our ancestors, our descendants, and even now, we don't see those life, liberty, and pursuit of happinesses that are embowed into what I consider, or what many consider, the real America, which is what I see in the administration right now. Because if you look at the history of this country, they have bonded us in slavery at one point. They have kicked out the Chinese at one point. They tried to enslave the Native Americans and basically exterminated them to the point where there are very few of them, and the very few are on land reservations.
True.
So this American melting pot is basically boiling right now, and we are in the stew.
We are. I think what I would say to that, though, is there are the ideals of America,
Mm-hmm.
and then there's the reality of America. And I actually wonder, in what other place in the world would you have a French, Spanish, Haitian, Italian, Creole to rise to the upper echelons of the Roman Catholic Church? Where else would you do that but in America? And for all of America's problems, and trust and believe, we have tons of them.
Yes.
We have tons of them. But I think that what makes this crazy experiment works is the hope and the push and struggle to make this country a more perfect union, to strive for that, to, in a very real sense, all of us who are in the struggle, be it Black, brown, indigenous, the Chinese, everybody that comes to this country as immigrants, as migrants, we are demanding, in a sense, that this country lives up to the ideals that it has said that it wants to live up to. And for those who are pushing back, what we're finding is that there's tension there, as there should be. Now, the question becomes, unfortunately, who wins?
Yeah. So in our hope, our hopes, you were mentioning hope about Pope Leo.
Mm-hmm.
Just to kind of like, cap this topic off, because Pope, he's going to be our Pope for a while. He's pretty young to be a
Lord
Pope.
willing.
Yeah. So it looks like he's going to be around for a while.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll give some of my hopes of Pope Leo. I hope he continues the legacy of Pope Francis,
Mm-hmm.
Who was the guy who kind of laid the path for him to be the Pope.
Yep.
So it looks like he's kind of doing that. He's speaking truth to power in some situations. He's spoken out against, the Gaza genocide and several other things that, some people in our clergy would not even touch.
True.
But he's willing to stand out on that truth.
Mm-hmm.
And I hope he, still has the idea of it being a job of service.
Oh, yeah.
We all know that the Pope of the Catholic Church is one of the most popular people in the world, in the entire world. So just understand that job is a job of service.
Right.
And I'm just saying this in my head, and maybe probably watching Conclave a lot too. That most people, most of the cardinals probably in the cardinal colleges probably don't even want that job because of so much pressure that is put on you. And you have to be, and I'm imagining just like in the movie Conclave, you got to be wary of people who want it. Right. Because they want it for probably selfish reasons and not for service.
Right.
So I'm assuming that, Cardinal Prevost, when he found out that he was the most popular candidate, he probably was like, okay, I got to do this job. But you know what? sometimes when people are called, it's not like God puts too much on you.
True.
So if God has called him to do it, and I'm pretty sure he was like, okay, if you want me to do it, but I'm sure he can handle it if he's been called to do that. So your
So
hopes for Pope Leo.
it's funny you should mention that, how he kind of reacted, because actually, from what I've been reading, um, one of the cardinals said that when he was announced, and they asked him if he wanted to accept it, he actually literally had his hands in his head for a number of minutes, like the weight of what he was going to be taking on. And he finally said yes. So my hope is that he continues to serve as the missionary priest that he always has been. And I believe that if he continues to serve with mission in mind, he will be okay. Because the heart of a missionary is to smell like the sheep. And he certainly did that, from what I've read during his time in Peru. And certainly from his service with the Augustinians. So my hope is that he continues with that missionary spirit, with that missionary heart, and service, also using the Augustinian principles in mind. And it's one last thing. It's interesting that he chose Leo the 14th, because Leo the 13th was one that really kind of ushered in what we think of as Catholic social teaching. So I can totally see, and my hope is that he may update that a little bit to look at what we're dealing with now. I know that he's already talked about things dealing with AI and social media, and he himself is on social media. So I can see his papacy grappling with those ideas, and then taking a next step when it comes to things like climate change. Taking a page from Laudato Si, which was sort of the blueprint that Pope Francis has laid out. So my hope and my prayer for Pope Leo is to continue to serve as the missionary that you are, and all will be well.
All right. Prayers to Pope Leo on his new job. Hope he does a great job, and we will be watching and waiting when he comes to Chicago.
Yes, even though he's a Sox fan, but that's okay.
Yes. Speaking of papacy and popes, which is associated with fatherhood, we want to get into fatherhood, since June is the month where we celebrate Father's Day.
Yes.
Fathers are very much very integral parts of the family.
True.
I know sometimes Father's Day doesn't get the celebratory way that Mother's Day has, but that's okay, because as a father, I always know that it's fatherhood is a thankless job from my perspective.
Okay.
And I don't know, mom, like I'll get the pushback from moms as well, and I understand that as well. But we as fathers, we sacrifice too. And a lot of times we don't get the credit or recognition. But I think as a father, I'm not doing this for credit or recognition. Right. I'm doing this so I can raise my children to be adults in society where somebody can come back and tell me they were great people. One of the things that I always say about, I always say to my children, I say, listen, what makes me happy as a father, not of the accomplishments that you've done because you can do them, the grades you get or whatever. It always warms my heart when somebody comes back and tells me your son or your daughter are such good people. That actually warms my heart, because part of that is, them being around me and their upbringing. So when you talk about that spiritual side of fatherhood, because I mean, as fathers, we always think about the social and physical, like, me giving money and providing a home and food and whatever like that, as a provider for the physical part. Something I can actually do if I wasn't in the house or anything like that.
True.
But I think the most important part of fatherhood is that spiritual part, giving our children some guidance to who they are and who they are to God, in relation to God. Because part of my definition of fatherhood is to lead my children to God.
Okay.
And I think as a father, I have to lead my children to God. And it's one of my more important duties to do that. So just like my father has done to me,
right?
And that's why I put it in my definition of fatherhood when I talk about fatherhood. So that spiritual aspect of men who lead who lead not just their children, but children who are in front of them, those mentors and those uncles and grandfathers and all of those men who represent what a man is, and then represent that men submit to God.
Right.
And that's another thing too. Fatherhood is almost like it's a step up from manhood, if you ask me. Because obviously you can't be a father unless you're a man. And I think part of that spiritual aspect of manhood is that submission to God. We as men have to understand what is our relationship to God. Because just like we were talking about the Pope.
Yeah.
In regards to fatherhood, it's all about service.
Yes.
Service to your family. Yes, if you ask my wife who's the man of the house, they'll point to me.
Right.
And that's only because I serve her, I serve my daughter, and when my son was there, I would serve them. I would serve him.
Right.
So that's the only reason why I am the man, because I have those responsibilities to take care of them. So me being a father isn't me just barking out orders like, you do this, you do that. I'm the man in the house and I'm supposed to. No, I'm supposed to be there to serve them.
Right.
And that's the reason why if you ask any of my family members who is the man of the house, they will point to me.
Right.
It's that responsibility that I have. Sometimes I'll be like Pope Leo and be like, oh God. but that's that responsibility that I have. So it's that embrace of that responsibility that I say that as long as my family is fine, then I'll be fine.
Yeah, when I think of fatherhood, and the two men that I think of is my own father. And not only my own father, but also my brother Chris. And with my own father, and he's not a perfect man, no man is. But part of that teaching is also through being. Quiet man, a few words. And I really got to appreciate him when, even more so of who he is and how he is, when my stepmother was dying. She died of Alzheimer's. And watching him take care of her, and while also showing his grown children how you are to take care of your spouse, how you are to serve your family entirely, and when to ask for help.
Yep.
Showed me how strong of a man he is. And now he's a grandfather, great-grandfather even, and he's still there. He's staying with my youngest sister and her family, and he's still there serving. You know, whenever the kids need anything, he's there. Whenever my sister needs advice, he's there. Whenever her husband needs advice, he's there. And it's that quiet strength that shows me that he's a man of God. When I think of my brother, and it's funny watching him with my nephew. My nephew's been staying with us for the past several months now. He's only 8 months old. He'll be 9 months at the end of this month. And it's funny watching this little 9-month-old and his little his little willy thing, and he goes into his room. He's looking and peeking over, and you know, because it's mostly the women that's kind of taking care of. But then he wants to spend his time with this man, this guy, and my brother would grab him, pick him up. Hey, what you doing there? You know, and he's just, you know, he's attuned to it. He'll fall asleep in his arms while listening to reggae, and I'm just amazed at this bonding that this little 9-month-old has with this 48, 49-year-old man. But it's because there's this need, I think this spiritual sense, this spiritual need to have that type of connection. I see it with his daughters. His daughters are now teenagers. And my brother, he had suffered, he had gotten sick during COVID, and he's now in a wheelchair. But watching him, despite that, still be father with authority. And the kids, the girls listen to him. That's fatherhood. I mean, any man can have a child, but it takes that one person, that one man to step up and become father. So much so that I can see him mediating stuff over the phone between his daughter and the mother with such authority that the daughter listens. And he's, you know, and so I think that our world is slowly missing the unique strength of fathers. And I personally believe that we need to celebrate them more. We need to teach our young men more about what it means to be a father, what sacrifice that is, because it is a sacrifice.
Yeah, it is. And I think the role, just like you said, we need more fathers, but I think we as fathers have to expand our roles of fatherhood outside of our family. So when I always say you have to be a man first to be a father, that gives that father the ability to expand his role, because to me, any child that comes in front of me, I take on that role as father, even if he has a father. Right now, that child that's in front of me, who's looking towards me, who's looking for kind of support, I am that child's father at that moment.
Right.
And I think we should all have that mentality that any child that comes in our presence who is, whether they're trying to get our attention or, we need to correct them in a certain way, we have to be there as a father. And I would assume mothers would be the same way.
Right.
That motherly instinct would kick in and say, hey, let me talk to you for a minute.
Right.
So my responsibility isn't just to my own biological children.
Right.
It's to any child who's in front of me. I remember a friend was telling me about that because, he feels the same way. And it's only because the neighborhood he was living in, there were a lot of boys who didn't have a father there. And so what he would always say is, because of the fact that it was was a dangerous neighborhood that he was in, because he has a son and a daughter.
Right.
And he says, if I have to be a father to all of these boys out here to just keep my children safe, then I'm gonna have to do that.
Yeah, and it's funny you should say that, because that used to be the norm, to tell you quite honestly. And there used to be a time where, I know my mom would tell me this a lot, that if a child did something wrong in the neighborhood, the entire neighborhood, including the fathers, would chastise that child. And it was very much, it takes a village to raise a child. And I think that when we got away from that sense of our spiritual selves, of what it means to be a part of a community, to be a part of a family outside of our nuclear family, when we started chasing that almighty dollar and upward mobility and things, we lost our community, we lost our family that was in our neighborhoods, and we lost our families in the homes.
Yeah. And I know I always hear you can't have a village without the women, but you can't have a village without the men either.
Yeah.
And they work hand in hand. They're not, the father's up here and the woman's up here. Basically, it's a partnership. It works hand in hand with each other.
Right.
So, and this is why we get into these gender wars, which I think is kind of senseless, because of the fact that when you think about it, in a true family household, in a true village, in a community, women and men work together.
Yeah.
Me and my wife, we work together to raise our children, and we don't supersede anybody, and especially in front of the children, because we trust each other's instinct. Her as a mom, me as a dad, to raise our children.
Right.
And then there's certain aspects of raising these children, because with my son, I'm the only one that can show him what manhood looks like. And with her, she shows my daughter what womanhood looks like. However, we do kind of cross, because I have to show my daughter how a man is supposed to treat a woman, and then my wife tells my son, this is how you treat a woman.
Right.
So those roles are no more important or no less than than what each other gives. And this is why I always say, if it has to come down to hierarchy, like I said, I am the servant to all.
Right.
Which makes me important because of the fact that I serve them in a capacity where if they need something from me, whether it be monetary, whether it be emotional, whether it be spiritual support, they can come to me.
I believe there is a passage, I want to say Galatians maybe, where St. Paul talks about that very thing. And the one thing that St. Paul says, husbands, serve your wives, in this case, serve your families, as Christ served the church, or love.
Mm-hmm.
Love your wives, love your families, as Christ so loved the church. Now, the way I interpret that is Christ loved the church so much that he sacrificed himself for the church.
Mm-hmm.
And what St. Paul is saying is that fathers, husbands have to be willing to do that type of sacrifice for their families. And I'm of the belief that if a woman knows that her husband, her man, is willing to make that type of sacrifice for her, for the children, that she has no problem following him because, as you said, he is there to serve them. Mm-hmm. And in serving them, that means that any decisions that are made while jointly, there's this understanding that those decisions are going to be made to protect me, to protect the kids, to protect our family.
The whole unit.
The whole unit. And when we look at it that way, the onus is on the man.
Yeah, it is. And when I look at a biblical passage about what fatherhood is, I think of what Jesus said to his disciples. The greatest among you is the servant to all.
Yeah.
That to me is the essence of fatherhood. The greatest among you is the servant of all. Mm-hmm. So when you think of fatherhood, that's what I always think of. I think of that particular scripture. Now, another day that is important to our culture is Juneteenth. We don't know if our illustrious president is going to repeal that holiday. Maybe it might be too late. Maybe it'll still be a holiday, but it is in essence Juneteenth, which is June 19th, which marks what many people call the end of slavery. Mm-hmm. For those who don't know what the narrative is, June 19th, 1865 is when Gordon Granger of the Union Army marched into Texas, which was the last Confederate stronghold to surrender, and gave General Order number, was it 10?
I think so.
That all slaves must be freed from that particular area of Texas. And, many people call it Emancipation Day. Many people in Texas have celebrated it since, I think it's 1867. It's, and like 2 years after that. So it was a big celebratory thing in Texas, and then it spread around the South. Texas actually made it a state holiday in, I think it was 79 or something like that. And then the events started to come up north, and then many people started to recognize Juneteenth in the northern cities, several years later. And then President Biden at the time had declared Juneteenth a holiday in 2021 or 2020?
2021.
2021. So it was declared a federal holiday. Now, why is this important? I've had somebody challenge me on this because it's like, so we got this white man coming into a slave state of Texas telling us that we's free. Sounds like a white savior story. However, here's the thing. Now, if we read in our history books, the Confederate Army actually surrendered to the Union Army in April of 1865 at Appomattox, Virginia.
Yep.
But then again, okay, why didn't the slaves in Texas get that notification? Because the Confederates in Texas didn't want to give up their slaves, and they just basically said, "You need to send the army up in here. So that's what they did.
Right.
So Gordon Granger comes in and basically, like I said, but what is not talked about a lot is Gordon Granger's battalion that came into not Houston, but they marched through Houston, but it was the coastal Texas city. I forgot the name
Corpus
of it.
Christi?
No, not Corpus Christi. God, it'll come to me. Galveston, yes. His battalion was 70% black.
Oh.
He had a 70% black battalion. Now, something else that is not talked about in Civil War narrative is that in the beginning stages of the Civil War, the Union Army wasn't making very much headway into the South. Obviously, there were several people who were abolitionists, like Frederick Douglass, who suggested to Lincoln, we need to start recruiting black folks into the Union Army. Well, at that time, black folks weren't allowed to be in the Union Army at the time. However, when people like Frederick Douglass and Martin Delany was showing him that there's not a lot of Union soldiers that's willing to go down there and fight their white brothers over slavery, then finally, with the Emancipation Proclamation, which was 2 years before 1865, 1863, he finally allowed black troops into the Union Army. The tide had turned after that, and then you had the resulting victory of the Union Army,
right,
because of the recruitment of the black troops. So when we talk about who freed us from slavery, we freed us from slavery. So that's why Juneteenth is important. So no, it is not a story of white heroism. White people did not free us. We freed us.
One thing that I will say about Juneteenth and some of the holidays that were given to us, because King Day also kind of falls into this as well, is that we have to, while we celebrate these commemorations, we also have to be very careful that we demand more. And when I say demand more, I mean making sure that there is true equality for all. With the rollback of what the current administration calls DEI programs in place of meritocracy, is only code for we want white mediocrity. And while we celebrate Juneteenth, let us remember what it is that those troops did, and sort of what our calling call is to do now. And that is that there is excellence among Blacks. There is excellence among African Americans. And if we only accept the occasional day off holiday to placate us, then we're doing those ancestors who fought and died in some cases a disservice. So it's very important that while we remember these commemorations, that we use them to uplift not only ourselves but everyone else, and to beat back this notion of anti-DEI antics, and recognize that we all have something to give.
Yeah, so, and also too, at the time of this filming, we recognize the 5th anniversary of the murder of George Floyd.
Yes.
By Minnesota Police Department, which actually prompted Juneteenth to be a holiday by the administration that was in the White House at the time. So, reflecting on the 5th anniversary, we're sort of getting news of rollbacks from a lot of the Department of Justice's monitoring of police departments. The Trump administration is currently trying to repeal those monitoring efforts and basically kind of give police free range to do what they want to, in the sake of protecting white supremacy. But the work has to keep, going, or else we're going to have a lot more George Floyds in our streets. So
absolutely,
the work has to keep on. So one of the most popular movies in the last couple of weeks.
Lastly, yes.
The movie Sinners.
Yes.
It's an interesting movie.
Mm-hmm.
A movie that has a lot of symbolism.
It does.
Notwithstanding it is also a good movie. It has a good storyline as well. But the symbolism, it kind of made my head want to explode because there was so much in it. But we're going to offer some perspectives on it. We're not suggesting you go see it or not go see it, but we found it interesting enough to kind of give some sort of the interpretive symbols that were in the movie. You start off with what you thought.
So for me, I kind of saw it as an ode to the blues. And when we think of the musical genre of the blues, it has that quintessential spiritual push and pull between it. Love loss. It has that sense of there's a particular path that you want to go on, but there's all of these different, shall we say, distractions that may take you on another path. It's very much about that questions of the crossroads, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
And which path do you follow? And with that, you're kind of drawn into the story, sort of thinking about your own path, your own journey. If I maybe would have made this decision as opposed to that decision, where would my life have led me? Do I listen to my parents?
Mm-hmm.
Or do I follow what is strongly held within my heart? There's also a little bit of, do I fall into the norms at the time? You know, those norms, those racial norms, or do I buck against it? And finally, the other thing that really struck me about the story that was put forth was this sense of how spiritual music is, especially in the right hands. In the right hands, your spiritual journey can take you across generations and across different astral planes, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
And in some cases, or at least in the case of sinners, call forth the devil himself. In the form of a vampire.
Okay, all right. Well, I look at it from two aspects, the social and the spiritual. Now, obviously, with the social, there's a lot of historical context.
Mm-hmm.
You know, first of all, it's kind of a period piece where you're talking about 1930 Mississippi. Many of those characters in there are either from the slavery era or direct offsprings of slaves.
Right.
So they're coming right off of slavery. They're, probably in the middle of Jim Crow right now.
Yeah, definitely.
And we see a lot of the traumas that slavery has done to these people, with many of the conflicts that they have within their family lineages, the drinking that goes on, the fighting, the infidelity that happens. And so you look at these aspects of the social, you look at the social aspects of the way that these people were living, and you start to understand that some of these were the legacy of slavery. Now, we also look at the cultural aspects when you think about some of the things that were brought over here when our ancestors were captured in slavery, like the African spirituality that the woman had. I can't think of her character's name, but, she brought that aspect of,
right.
Herbalist and, kind of like, what they call a voodoo priestess,
Mm-hmm.
which, I know it's a negative connotation, in some religious circles, but it's not necessarily pagan in a sense, because if you look at Voodooism actually does believe in a supreme being.
Absolutely.
Which that person is God.
Right.
So I look at that social context, and then also too, even with the vampires, and looking at Remy, who was the main vampire, and
right.
where he came from, because I guess he was he's been living for thousands of years, and he was there when the potato famine happened, all the way up to when the English basically kind of robbed the Irish of their lands.
Right.
So lots of historical perspectives when you think about. Also too, the brothers, the twins, because. Mm-hmm. Remember in the story, we're giving spoilers out, so if you didn't see it, that's too bad. We gave spoilers out. So the brothers went to Chicago and then they worked for Al Capone, and then they came back to open up the juke joint.
Right.
Now, something I caught in the movie was when one of the brothers was talking to the woman who was the herbalist.
Right.
Because apparently they had a child together, and the child
Yeah.
had passed away.
Right.
And she was saying how they was having that conversation about how they went up there to go work for Al Capone, and they got the Irish and the Italians fighting each other.
Right.
Because apparently they stole like liquor from both sides and blamed the other ones.
Right.
Which prompted the St. Valentine's Day massacre.
Yeah.
Because Al Capone sent a couple of hitmen to the north side to kill some Irish mobsters.
Yep.
So they inserted the brothers in that story, saying that they got the Italians and the Irish fighting each other.
Right.
So I like that little historical play
Twist.
with the two brothers getting the two white groups to fight each other. Now, the spiritual aspect, which was a lot, and I'll try to cover this in a couple of minutes. You find a conflict between culture and spirituality, and particularly Christianity. Because connecting to that social aspect, many of those characters were trying to find an identity.
Yeah.
And how do we, and they were trying to find that identity through a cultural lens.
Right.
And you were mentioning the blues music, which is like almost the center of
Right.
of this whole thing, because in all essence, the story was about Sammy, who was the blues player.
Right.
But the thing was that, remember, his father was trying to get
preacher.
him into the church and trying to steer him away from that blues music, because at that time, that wall between culture and Christianity was there.
Right.
Because if you remember back then, they believed blues was the devil music.
Exactly.
But now we combine blues with Christian music, and we call it gospel.
Yeah.
It's
Pretty
gospel.
much.
It's basically gospel music. But the thing too is that it also brought out a lot of other music.
Yeah.
And you saw that scene where many of the genres of music, rock, jazz, hip hop, and so that traveled through time in that one scene in the juke joint where
Right.
Sammy was playing his guitar, Delroy Lindo was character was playing the piano, and the woman was singing, and then you got that time travel, that concept of music, like you said, that spiritual power of music, which was able to spawn all across time, and then actually even going back to the African roots of music, and even in Asian culture, because remember, you had the two Asian people there. So that power, that spiritual power of music couldn't be harnessed in that way because of the fact that wall between Christianity and culture was there. And it was all about trying to find an identity. So even when the vampires came in to offer, the people in the juke joint,
Right.
a life of immortality,
Right.
because that's what vampires are. They're they live forever.
Up to a point.
Up to a point where and see here's the thing too. Even the concept of the vampires, and I like how Ryan Coogler left out some of the old traditional vampirism. Which one of the things is that crosses, he didn't do any of the crosses, and he did the traditional garlic that would could, and then also too garlic staking, and also too vampires can't come in unless they're invited,
right?
Which I think is an important point, because when you think of the title sinners, right, all of them we're delving into a type of sin, whether it be because in the juke joint there was all kind of drinking, there was all kind of infidelity,
right?
There was a murder that happened in there,
Yep.
And then the vampires come in because they're of a more depraved kind of sin, because they want to kill you and drink your blood and turn you into this undead person. And remember when the herbalist was talking about how a vampire is somebody whose soul is trapped in their body and they can't go into the ancestor realm.
Right.
So it in a sense, they make it seem like Remy, who was the lead vampire, was offering them this immortality and this power because of the fact that he was playing off their oppression. He was playing like, hey, look, I was in, like the English did to us just like they did to y'all. They put us in slaves. They oppressed us. They took our land as well. And so this whole idea of trying to get over oppression through those means of immortality was a way of tempting them into a life that was like that made them lose their identity.
But here's another interesting point to be made too. So before the vampire Remy makes it to the juke joint, he first goes to this white couple, right? And prior to him making it to the white couple, who was it? It was the indigenous that was out searching for him, because they understood that he represented evil. And when they had asked, did they see Remy? They said, no, we don't know what you're talking about. Get away from here, And it was the sin of their racism that ultimately got them turned. Because when Remy then came into their house, what did he do?
He killed them.
He killed them.
And then turned them into vampires. And that's that wall between culture and spirituality. Because of the fact that there's that wall there, the culture of racism didn't allow them to see that, look, they're trying to save y'all.
Right.
But y'all wasn't trying to listen. So guess what? What did the one Choctaw say? Sun is coming down. Let's get out of here. Because they knew that's when Remy was the most powerful. So you know what? We gonna let them handle it. And they saw like the Klan outfits that they had.
Yeah.
And even at that point, they were like, we looking for this guy. I don't think you need to be messing with him. But they didn't want to listen. So this is what happened. So
as they say, they effed around and found out.
Yeah, and like I said, it ends up with everybody having a struggle with identity.
Yeah.
And it also too, and this is an aspect that I think a lot of us, especially people in the faith, have to understand, that because of the fact that we got white Christianity embedded on us, and we don't understand the African origins of Christianity. We try to use this white Christianity as our identity, because if you notice, remember towards the scene where Remy baptized Sammy, as like a kind of like a depraved way of baptism. Right. And then he tried to say the Our Father.
Right.
And guess what Remy did? Remy started saying the Our Father with him.
Right.
And he was like, oh, it gives me so much comfort.
Right.
And it was just basically powerless, because that particular type of Christianity to us has no power. And if we discover the African roots of our Christianity, which was actually being portrayed in the movie,
right,
then that lends more power. You notice the herbalist, the woman herbalist was saying like, she was warning one of the brothers like, no, that's a vampire, because remember the vampires were trying to get in, and they were like, just come on in. Like, no, let me in. And that's another thing too. We all think that evil has this overpowering thing over us.
Very subtle.
And another thing too.
It's very subtle.
We only give evil power when we allow it in our lives.
Absolutely. And I mean, to me, that is the overarching lesson. If this was a parable, the overarching lesson. And it was something that Sammy's father said.
Mm-hmm.
He said, be careful. I think it was be careful playing with the devil because one day he'll follow you home.
He gonna follow you home.
And it goes back to the story of Adam and Eve.
Mm-hmm.
It was the subtleness of what Satan was saying to them that tripped them up. You know, because everything that Remy was saying, everything that Satan was saying was true. But it was a question of, is this the path as you're at this crossroads? Is this the path that you want to go down?
Yeah, because remember, when Remy was offering them immortality, he didn't have the fangs out at that moment.
Mm-hmm.
Many of those vampires who turn, you know, because remember, the woman also said that there's still a piece of their personality that's in them.
Right.
But they just can't release their souls because of the fact that it's trapped in their body.
Right.
So, but they give into that insatiable hunger
right.
of blood sucking, that they would do anything to get that blood. So they still have that personality within them.
Right.
They're not complete monsters.
Right.
But they still have that personality where you see who they are. Like the big boy who got turned, you know.
Yeah.
He didn't initially come out, you know, in his whole vampire regalia.
Right.
He just was like, man, come on, man, let me in, you know.
Right. And it's just like, but wait a minute.
Yeah, but wait a minute.
Why do we need to let
you in? So just like you said, the devil doesn't come in horns and a red suit.
No.
The devil can come as a beautiful woman. The devil can come as a handsome man and can give you the world.
Yeah.
Just like he did Jesus.
Yeah.
What did he do to Jesus? He took him on top of a mountain and said, "This is all yours. Just worship me."
Exactly.
Now, did Jesus say, "You lying? You don't own all this"?
No.
Jesus didn't say any of that. He was like, ain't going for it.
Yeah.
So.
Exactly. And I mean, that's ultimately the lesson, because, and the other lesson I would say is that it's a choice. It is a choice.
Mm-hmm.
Knowing what you know, do you still choose to go down this path or that path? Now, Sammy was lucky, but Sammy was only lucky because, what were the brothers' names?
Stack and Smoke.
Smoke and Stack. So Sammy was lucky because Smoke made Stack promise not to kill Sammy.
Yes, and that after scene credit was very interesting, because when you think about when they visited Sammy years later and he became a successful blues player, and it was Stack who was turned?
Yeah.
It was Stack and his girlfriend, his girlfriend, who also passed for white,
right,
because she had an African ancestor,
right,
somewhere. That promise, you know, which was kind of a turn, because that promise was made by his brother and he kept it.
Right.
And he kept it, which also gives a message of some sort of redemption, even if you do turn down that small path. Mm-hmm. That there is still a little bit of you know, a little bit of goodness there.
Yeah.
You know, because he could have told his brother, "No, I ain't listening to you," but he still kept his word, and he still kept his word up to that point. Now, like I said, the title Sinners was basically everybody in that movie.
Yeah.
And even in their depravity, whether you be inside of the juke joint or outside of the juke joint, like I said, there was still a conflict of identity, because what did Sammy, the old Sammy, said to Stack? He said that was the best time in his life.
Right.
Because at that point, they never saw their purpose. They never saw their purpose, and their purpose was laid in personal pleasure.
Right.
And so when we lay our purposes in personal pleasure instead of sacrificing for the good,
right,
we just talked about sacrifice,
right,
then that leads you to a road where it might be it might lead to a dead end, or most cases it will lead you to a dead end,
right,
because sometimes our callings aren't something that we see as profitable. True. Or something that'll make us feel good.
Right.
So even in that sense, I don't think Sammy still learned his lesson about that being the best time of his life. How could that be the best time of your life when you almost got killed that night? Well, this is our month show for today. We encourage you to subscribe to our electronic newsletter, The Pulse of Black Catholic Chicago, which Tina is the managing editor of. So subscribe to it. We also have a YouTube, so obviously this will be on YouTube. So like, share, subscribe to our YouTube page. We also have a Facebook page, and we also have a X page too. So
yeah, I know, right? We have an X page.
Yes, we do. Yes, we do. So any final thoughts?
If you get an opportunity, do go see Sinners, and let us know what you think of the movie. I think that you'll find that there is lots and lots of meat on the bone of that movie, and we just only tapped the surface of it. Mm-hmm. And also, let's offer prayers to Pope Leo XIV as he begins his papacy, and finally to George Floyd, who lost his life needlessly because of racism, to tell you quite honestly, and police brutality.
All right, so this is our end of the episode for Catholic Crossroads, a Black Catholic Journey. I'm Gardis Watts.
And I'm Tina Carter. May the Lord bless you and keep you, and may his light shine upon you and bring you peace.
Amen.